Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to be doing another anime type creature. I had a lot of you guys suggest doing Ninetails and Totoro. I didn't have the fabric to do Totoro, so that's going to be kind of for later, but today I'm going to be doing Ninetails from Naruto. I actually really like Naruto. I've watched the first part where he's a young kid over and over and over again. I kind of leave it on loop every now and again just in the background while I'm working, and I made it roughly about halfway through Shippuden. I think I'm somewhere around episode 600 or something. But it's hard to watch episodes that have subtitles when you're working on things because most of the time I'm not watching the TV screen. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the clay face first and then move on to making the clay feet. So when I started Ninetails, I kind of had trouble deciding on how I wanted to stylize him. Part of me wanted to make him look more elegant and foxy, but the other part of me was like, no, we need to make him look exactly like he is in the anime. So I had a little bit of trouble deciding on how I wanted to go, because if I was going to make him more elegant, his mouth was going to be closed and it was just going to be like sleek and delicate looking, but part of me was like, yeah, that doesn't fit Ninetails' personality at all. So I decided to go the other way around and just really try to pick up on the characteristics that he has in the anime. So I'm going to make him snarling where you can see his teeth, and it kind of turns into like a wicked smile also. And then I also want to make his eyes really wide where you see the whites of them, so I had to do something different with the eyes for that. So the first thing that I did was I made a kind of foxy shaped lump of tinfoil, and I covered that in a thick layer of clay, started building up the clay for his cheekbones and different things like that. I left his snout very thin because we're going to have to do some type of layering thing. We'll get to that when we work on it. But right now what we're going to do is we're going to work on the eyes. So like I said, I want to have the whites of his eyes showing, but I don't have glass eyes that are going to look like that. But I do have these really cool red beads. So like I said, I want the whites of his eyes to show, so the best way to do that I figured would be to make them out of clay, and then for his iris to be a glass bead. I found these red ones in all my beads and stuff, and I figured they work really well, and then for the pupil we can just paint that on when we do all the painting. So after I got the eyelids in place, the next thing that I did was I started framing around them to make the shape of the blackness that goes around his eye. So his eyes are kind of like a raccoon's where they're kind of blacked out around them, but I don't want that part to be fur, I want that to be clay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to frame around it, that way I know where to stop adding the fur when we fur our face. Now while I work on his mouth, it's going to look kind of strange. Like I said, we're going to have to do this in layers. So the first thing that I ended up doing was I laid out where the teeth are going to go. So I made a bunch of balls of clay, they're all roughly the same size, and then I rolled them out into cones and I started laying them kind of zigzaggedy on the sides of his face. And then for the front teeth, I made them a little bit smaller and more rounded. And then of course we need his canines. I'm going to mainly just do the upper canines, I'm not going to do the bottom canines. I don't really think they show too much unless his mouth is more open. So after I have all the teeth laid out, I'm going to clean up any excess clay that I don't want, and then I'm going to start framing around these with a strip of clay on the top and bottom to make his lips. Now his lips are also going to be a black, and they're going to be separate from the fur on his face, so I'm also going to have to frame these and kind of keep them separate from the rest of the face. That way I have a nice line to follow when I add the fur. Now I'm going to work on the top of his snout and his nose. So I'm going to add some clay for where I want his nose to go. I'm going to kind of blend it into the rest of the face and then define the nostrils. And then we want to add some kind of wrinkles on the top of his snout because he's snarling. And whenever a creature kind of snarls, they do wrinkle up their face a bit. So we want to have that just a little bit on his face. I'm going to be making these wrinkles a little bit deeper than I would recommend if you were just sculpting a face, mainly because we're going to be furring it. A lot of this is going to have like a thick layer of fur over it, so it's going to be a little less deep after we're done, so we want to make sure that it still shows. So I'm going to make them over dramatic right now, but they'll look a little bit more realistic later. As I was working on him and he was getting closer to being done, I realized he kind of looks like a food dragon right now, so you could honestly probably use this same idea to make a dragon with his face. So the last thing that we're going to work on now is we're going to clean up the edge around the base of his head, and we're going to define where we're going to connect his ears to. So that shadowing that goes around his eye extends into his ear, so that's going to be connected. So we're going to end up making a kind of a track or a line where we're going to put the ears later. So I'm trying to make a nice guideline of where we're going to put his felt ears and have them start. Okay, so I really like how he looks, even though he looks like a food dragon. I'm going to put him in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 45 minutes. Okay, so now we're going to work on the clay feet. Now his feet are not foxy at all. They're more human-like or demon-like, since he is technically kind of like a demon. So I'm going to be making them similar to human hands, except they're going to be kind of witchy in style. Now his front feet and his back feet are very similar in structure, so I'm mainly going to show you the making of one and then just quickly show you how the other one looks. So the first thing that we need to start doing is we need to start covering up our wire frame and just kind of getting things laid out. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a lump of clay and cover up where all the wires are combined, and then we're also going to be adding some clay to the tips of all the wires and just kind of like pinching them a bit so they're kind of more pointed and making the claws. After that, we're going to pre-bake it for a little bit to save our progress at 275 Fahrenheit for about 15-20 minutes. Once it's out of the oven and is cool to touch, we're going to start laying out strips to cover up the bottom of the foot and just kind of laying everything out. Once you have the bottoms of the feet all laid out and blended together, if you want, you can do another pre-bake. It's not necessary, but it does help save you from messing anything up if you end up bumping something. So the tops of the feet are going to be done very similar to the bottoms. We're just laying out strips of clay and blending them into the clay that's already on the wire frame. Now with the sculpting of the feet, we're not going to add a ton of detail or anything. I'm mainly focusing on getting the correct shape because we're going to end up furring the tops of these, so you're not going to see any texture or anything like that. Okay, so that's how I did the front feet. For the back feet, I just removed a digit, so he's only going to have 4. I'm not 100% sure if this is accurate because I had trouble finding good screenshots of what his back feet look like. So I just kind of went with how the anatomy of a fox works, and the fox has the little dew claw, so he has 5 digits on the front feet, and he won't have 5 digits on the back, he'll only have 4. So I kind of just took that into account with doing the back feet this way. Other than that, the toes are all nice and long and witchy, just like the front feet. So I'm going to put these in for another bake, probably another 35-45 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. And then once everything is out of the oven and is cooled, we can start on painting everything. Now the painting for this isn't that complicated, it's mainly just laying out colors. There's not really much shading or anything involved because of the anime style that we're doing. The main thing that's going to slow you down is just getting those straight lines so everything looks very crisp. So the first thing that we're going to do is we need to primer and get our main color down, which is the color of the fur. So it's kind of that orange reddish color, and we're just going to cover everything in it. Now I did do my best to not get that much on the whites of the eyes because I will have to paint over them until that doesn't show through, so I didn't cover that completely. Once we have our primer down for the face, the next thing that we're going to work on is cleaning up those details. So I'm going to start with those teeth, and what we're going to do is we're going to go over with a black. I'm going to water it down slightly, and I'm going to go over all the teeth, and then once I have all the cracks of the teeth nice and black, I can start whitening those teeth with white paint. So I can go over these as many times as I want to brighten them up. You don't have to go over them completely, you're welcome to leave them kind of dingy, but I want to have them just kind of sparkle. So I'm going to whiten those teeth, and then I'm going to start painting the lips around the mouth black. You'll want to take this nice and slow so you don't bump the teeth, of course, so just take your time with it. And then after the lips are done, we're going to use the same black and go around the eyes with it. And we're going to go over the nose. For the nose, after I get it all black, the only thing I'm going to do to it is add a little bit of a white highlight at the tip of it. And then once all the black has dried, you want to make sure it's dried so it doesn't mix and turn gray with your white. You can start doing the whites of the eyes. So I'm going to go over this until they're nice and white, and then I'm going to use my tools to clean off the white paint that gets on the glass beads for the eyes. And then after those beads are nice and clean, what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of black and we're going to paint in the pupil. And we're just going to be painting a line right in the middle of the bead. And then after that we can start painting our feet. For the feet, we're going to do basically the same thing and primer them the same color that we primered the face, get them completely covered this time. So I'm not going to add, like I said, a lot of detail to the feet because we're going to fur them, but we do want the colors all laid out. So I'm going to darken the bottoms of the feet just slightly, and then I'm also going to be painting the claws white. And that's basically it for the painting. I'm going to let everything dry, and then the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up some resin and I'm going to paint over. On the face, I'm going to just paint over the teeth, the nose, and the eyes. I'm going to leave the rest of the face completely blank. I don't want resin on that because it makes it harder for the fur to stick. But for the feet, I'm just going to cover them completely because it's going to be too much of a pain to not paint over the tops of the feet and to do all the bottoms. So it's just going to be easier to completely resin the tops and bottoms of the feet and just work with what we have. So all the resin is going to have to cure overnight, 24 to 48 hours. Usually it's fine by the next day. So while that's curing, I'm going to work on sewing all the pieces for the body. Okay, so for the body, I drew out this very simple pattern. It's very similar to how a normal fox's body would be, except I made the legs a lot longer. In fact, I actually made them longer than the pattern shows right now because I decided to extend them a bit when I was putting everything together. So they're even longer than this. So the first bit of sewing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take the left and right side of our body and I'm going to sew down his back. We're going to be leaving the belly open, so when we close everything up, that's where we're going to close it up. And then I'm going to be taking his front and back legs, and we're going to take the inside portion and the outside portion, sandwich them together with the fur on the inside, and sew down the fronts of all the legs. And then the thing that took me the longest was sewing all 9 of the tails. So I made a very simple pattern for that as well, and I just folded it in half and started closing it up, and then I flipped it right side out and stuffed it. And of course, had to do that 9 times. Okay, so that's all the prepping that I can do before we start putting everything together. So our clay pieces are finally done curing, and we're going to start putting everything onto a wire frame. So I have a very simple wire frame. The main thing that I have to do now is add extra wires for all the tails. So I have a center wire which is part of the spine, and then I'm going to add 8 more wires for the tail. So they're basically 4 wires technically folded in half, and I just kind of twisted them and added them to the frame. After those were all in place, I took all the tails and I slid them over the wires for the tails, and I kind of sewed the ends of the tails all together into one giant mass. Next, I took the piece for the body and I slid this over the wire frame. So I cut some tiny holes for the wires for the legs, and I just kind of slid it on like some clothes. After that was in place, I took our clay head and I glued it onto the end of the wire for the neck. I made sure to give it plenty of time to dry, and then I took the fabric that's for the body, that portion that's going to go around the neck, and I glued it around the base of the head. We let that dry a little bit, that way we didn't have to worry about tugging it out of place, and then I started stuffing and closing up the body. Once we have the body stuffed and closed up, what we're going to do is we're going to start shaving everything. So I'm going to be shaving the sides of the body really short, and then I'm also going to be shaving all the tails. Mainly doing the tails because they're a little too fluffy and it's hard to see the individual tails. It just kind of looks like a fan of fur. So I'm going to shorten the fur on that so they can be a little bit more individual. And then after we have that shaving done, we can start taking the fabric for the legs and start sewing those onto the body. So I'm going to take the inside portion of the legs and we're going to sew it underneath the wire, and then we're going to take the outer portion of the leg and sew it over the wire. So I'm going to start with the back legs first. I'm going to sew the fabric into place. I'm going to adjust the length of the wire that we have for the legs. I always leave it a little longer just in case. And then we're going to add the foot to the very end of this wire. So we're going to wrap that into place, make sure it's nice and secure, and then we can take the fabric for the leg and glue it around the base of the ankle. So we're going to glue that into place, let it dry, and then we can stuff and close up the back of the leg. Once I had the back legs sewn up, I decided I wanted to shave them real quick before starting on the front legs. And then we're going to do the front legs just like we did with the back. We're going to sew the fabric for it in place, add the feet to the wire frame, glue everything into place, let it dry a little bit, stuff and close it up. And then once that's all done, we're going to shave those as well. Okay, so the body is basically done right now. Now what we need to do is finish up the feet and the face. So I'm going to work on the face first, and we're going to be making a pair of ears for them. So the inside portion of the ear is going to be a black felt, and then the back portion is going to be the fur fabric that we used for the body. So I made a very simple pattern, and then I just glued these together. So I glued the felt onto the backing of the fur fabric. I let that dry a little bit, I cut it out, and then I glued around the edges of it to clean up the edge. And then I took my ears and I glued them onto the face. I kind of followed where I had the little black strip where the ears are going to go. Now at first I thought I would have to paint over this a little bit to help it blend into the face, but the felt actually blends in very nicely, so I didn't do anything after gluing it into place. After the ears were in place, I took some larger pieces of fur fabric and I started covering the majority of the face. So like the chin, the top of the head, maybe a little bit of the cheeks. The rest of it's going to end up being furred with fur trimmings. So I'm actually going to let the face dry a little bit before we add the fur trimmings, so I'm going to add the fur trimmings first to the feet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my fabric glue and I'm going to paint it onto the surface of the top of the foot. I'm going to make sure it's nice and smooth, and then we're going to sprinkle on our fur trimmings. I'm going to use my tools to straighten up the fur and make sure that any excess fur is off of the foot, and we're going to let all of those dry. And then for the face, we're basically doing the same thing. We just have to kind of follow the lines of the face to make sure that we don't get any fur on the black of the face. So we're mostly doing the fur trimmings on his little cheeks, going around the eyes, and then the top of the snout. And then just kind of cleaning up the edges around his lips. Okay guys, and that's how I made Ninetail from Naruto. I had so much fun with this project. I love his wicked smile, and I think I want to implement it more with my original creatures, mainly because I don't show off their teeth too often. I think it could be fun. Anyways, I'm going to have him along with a bunch of other creatures in my Etsy shop, so check the links down below if you want to buy anything. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!